Chapter 7. The Feasts, New Moons, and Sabbaths of the Hebrews. We have followed the Sabbath of the Lord through the books of Moses. A brief survey of the Jewish festivals is necessary to the complete view of the subject before us. Of these there were 3 feasts: the Passover, the Pentecost, and the Feast of Tabernacles. Each new moon, that is, the first day of each month throughout the year. Then there were 7 annual Sabbaths, namely, number 1, the first day of unleavened bread, number 2, the 7th day of that feast, number 3, the day of Pentecost, number 4, the first day of the 7th month, number 5, the 10th day of that month, number 6, the 15th day of that month, number 7, the 22nd day of the same. In addition to all these, every 7th year was to be the Sabbath of the land, and every 50th year the year of Jubilee. The Passover takes its name from the fact that the angel of the Lord passed over the houses of the Hebrews on that eventful night when the firstborn in every Egyptian family was slain. This feast was ordained in commemoration of the deliverance of that people from Egyptian bondage. It began with the slaying of the Paschal lamb on the 14th day of the first month, and extended through a period of 7 days in which nothing but unleavened bread was to be eaten. Its great antitype was reached when Christ, our Passover, was sacrificed for us. The Pentecost was the second of the Jewish feasts, and occupied but a single day. It was celebrated on the 50th day after the first fruits of barley harvest had been waved before the Lord. At the time of this feast, the first fruits of wheat harvest were offered unto God. The antitype of this festival was reached on the 50th day after the resurrection of Christ, when the great outpouring of the Holy Ghost took place. The Feast of Tabernacles was the last of the Jewish feasts. It was celebrated in the 7th month, when they had gathered in the fruit of the land, and extended from the 15th to the 21st day of that month. It was ordained as a festival of rejoicing before the Lord, and during this period the children of Israel dwelt in booths in commemoration of their dwelling thus during their sojourn in the wilderness. It probably typifies the great rejoicing after the final gathering of all the people of God into His kingdom. In connection with these feasts, it was ordained that each new moon, that is, the first day of every month, should be observed with certain specified offerings and with tokens of rejoicing. The annual Sabbaths of the Hebrews have been already enumerated. The first 2 of these Sabbaths were the 1st and the 7th days of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, that is, the 15th and 21st days of the first month. They were thus ordained by God. 7 days shall you eat unleavened bread. Even the first day you shall put away leaven out of your houses. And in the first day there shall be a holy convocation. And in the 7th day there shall be a holy convocation to you. No manner of work shall be done in them, save that which every man must eat, that only may be done of you. The third in order of the annual Sabbaths was the day of Pentecost. This festival was ordained as a rest day in the following language: And you shall proclaim on the selfsame day, that it may be a holy convocation unto you. You shall do no servile work therein. It shall be a statute forever in all your dwellings throughout your generations. The first day of the 7th month was the 4th annual Sabbath of the Hebrews. It was thus ordained: Speak unto the children of Israel, saying, In the 7th month, in the first day of the month, shall you have a Sabbath, a memorial of blowing of trumpets, a holy convocation. You shall do no servile work therein, but you shall offer an offering made by fire unto the Lord. The Great Day of Atonement was the 5th of these Sabbaths. Thus spake the Lord unto Moses. Also on the 10th day of this 7th month there shall be a day of atonement. It shall be a holy convocation unto you. Ye shall do no manner of work. It shall be a statute forever throughout your generations in all your dwellings. It shall be unto you a Sabbath of rest, and you shall afflict your souls. In the 9th day of the month at even, from even unto even, shall you celebrate your Sabbath. The 6th and 7th of these annual Sabbaths were the 15th and 22nd days of the 7th month, that is, the first day of the Feast of Tabernacles, and the day after its conclusion. Thus were they enjoined by God. Also in the 15th day of the 7th month, when you have gathered in the fruit of the land, you shall keep a feast unto the Lord 7 days. On the first day shall be a Sabbath, and on the 8th day shall be a Sabbath. Besides all these, every 7th year was a Sabbath of rest unto the land. The people might labor as usual in other business, but they were forbidden to till the land, that the land itself might rest. After 7 of these Sabbaths, the following or 50th year was to be the year of Jubilee, in which every man was to be restored unto his inheritance. There is no evidence that the Jubilee was ever observed, and it is certain that the sabbatical year was almost entirely disregarded. Such were the feasts, new moons, and Sabbaths of the Hebrews. A few words will suffice to point out the broad distinction between them and the Sabbath of the Lord. The first of the 3 feasts was ordained in memory of their deliverance from Egyptian bondage, and was to be observed when they should enter their own land. The second feast, as we have seen, could not be observed until after the settlement of the Hebrews in Canaan, for it was to be celebrated when the first fruits of wheat harvest should be offered before the Lord. The third feast was ordained in memory of their sojourn in the wilderness, and was to be celebrated by them each year after the ingathering of the entire harvest. Of course, this feast, like the others, could not be observed until the settlement of the people in their own land. The new moons, as has already been seen, were not ordained until after these feasts had been instituted. The annual Sabbaths were part and parcel of these feasts, and could have no existence until after the feasts to which they belonged had been instituted. Thus the 1st and 2nd of these Sabbaths were the 1st and 7th days of the Paschal Feast. The 3rd annual Sabbath was identical with the Feast of Pentecost. The 4th of these Sabbaths was the same as the new moon in the 7th month. The 5th one was the Great Day of Atonement. The 6th and the 7th of these annual Sabbaths were the 15th and 22nd days of the 7th month, that is, the first day of the Feast of Tabernacles and the next day after the close of that feast. As these feasts were not to be observed until the Hebrews should possess their own land, the annual Sabbaths could have no existence until that time, and so of the Sabbaths of the land. These could have no existence until after the Hebrews should possess and cultivate their own land. After 6 years of cultivation, the land should rest the 7th year and remain untilled. After 7 of these Sabbaths of the land came the year of Jubilee. The contrast between the Sabbath of the Lord and these Sabbaths of the Hebrews is strongly marked. Number 1, the Sabbath of the Lord was instituted at the close of the first week of time, while these were ordained in connection with the Jewish feasts. Number 2, the one was blessed and hallowed by God, because that He had rested upon it from the work of creation. The others have no such claim to our regard. Number 3, when the children of Israel came into the wilderness, the Sabbath of the Lord was an existing institution, obligatory upon them, but the annual Sabbaths then came into existence. It is easy to point to the very act of God while leading that people that gave existence to these Sabbaths, while every reference to the Sabbath of the Lord shows that it had been ordained before God chose that people. Number 4, the children of Israel were excluded from the promised land for violating the Sabbath of the Lord in the wilderness, but the annual Sabbaths were not to be observed until they should enter that land. This contrast would be strange indeed were it true that the Sabbath of the Lord was not instituted until the children of Israel came into the wilderness of sin. For it is certain that 2 of the annual Sabbaths were instituted before they left the land of Egypt. Number 5, the Sabbath of the Lord was made for man, but the annual Sabbaths were designed only for residents in the land of Palestine. Number 6, the one was weekly, a memorial of the Creator's rest. The others were annual, connected with the memorials of the deliverance of the Hebrews from Egypt. Number 7, the one is termed the Sabbath of the Lord, my Sabbaths, my holy day, and the like, while the others are designated as your Sabbaths, her Sabbaths, and similar expressions. Number 8, the one was proclaimed by God as one of the 10 Commandments and was written with his finger in the midst of the moral law upon the tables of stone and was deposited in the ark beneath the mercy seat. The others did not pertain to the moral law, but were embodied in that handwriting of ordinances that was a shadow of good things to come. Number 9, the distinction between these festivals and the Sabbaths of the Lord was carefully marked by God when he ordained the festivals and their associated Sabbaths. Thus he said, "These are the feasts of the Lord, which you shall proclaim to be holy convocations beside the Sabbaths of the Lord." The annual Sabbaths are presented by Isaiah in a very different light from that in which he presents the Sabbath of the Lord. Of the one he says, "Bring no more vain oblations. Incense is an abomination unto me. The new moons and Sabbaths, the calling of assemblies, I cannot away with. It is iniquity, even the solemn meeting. Your new moons and your appointed feasts my soul hateth. They are a trouble unto me. I am weary to bear them." In striking contrast with this, the same prophet speaks of the Lord's Sabbath. "Thus saith the Lord, Keep ye judgment, and do justice, for my salvation is near to come, and my righteousness to be revealed. Blessed is the man that doeth this, and the Son of Man that layeth hold on it, that keepeth the Sabbath from polluting it, and keepeth his hand from doing any evil. Neither let the son of the stranger that hath joined himself to the Lord speak, saying, The Lord hath utterly separated me from his people. Neither let the eunuch say, Behold, I am a dry tree. For thus saith the Lord unto the eunuchs that keep my Sabbaths, and choose the things that please me, and take hold of my covenant, even unto them will I give in mine house and within my walls a place and a name better than of sons and of daughters. I will give them an everlasting name that shall not be cut off. Also the sons of the stranger that join themselves to the Lord to serve him, and to love the name of the Lord, to be his servants, every one that keepeth the Sabbath from polluting it, and taketh hold of my covenant. Even them will I bring to my holy mountain, and make them joyful in my house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and their sacrifices shall be accepted upon mine altar, for mine house shall be called a house of prayer for all people. Hosea carefully designates the annual Sabbaths in the following prediction. I will also cause all her mirth to cease, her feast days, her new moons, and her Sabbaths, and all her solemn feasts. This prediction was uttered about B.C. 785. It was fulfilled in part about 200 years after this, when Jerusalem was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar. Of this event, Jeremiah about B.C. 588 speaks as follows. Her people fell into the hand of the enemy, and none did help her. The adversaries saw her and did mock at her Sabbaths. The Lord was as an enemy. He hath swallowed up Israel. He hath swallowed up all her palaces. He hath destroyed his strongholds, and hath increased in the daughter of Judah mourning and lamentation. And he hath violently taken away his tabernacle, as if it were of a garden. He hath destroyed his places of the assembly. The Lord hath caused the solemn feasts and Sabbaths to be forgotten in Zion, and hath despised in the indignation of his anger the king and the priest. The Lord hath cast off his altar. He hath abhorred his sanctuary. He hath given up into the hand of the enemy the walls of her palaces. They have made a noise in the house of the Lord, as in the day of a solemn feast. The feasts of the Lord were to be holden in the place which the Lord should choose, namely Jerusalem. And when that city, the place of their solemn assemblies, was destroyed, and the people themselves carried into captivity, the complete cessation of their feasts, and, as a consequence, of the annual Sabbaths, which were specified days in those feasts, must occur. The adversaries mocked at her Sabbaths by making a noise in the house of the Lord, as in the day of a solemn feast. But the observance of the Lord's Sabbath did not cease with the dispersion of the Hebrews from their own land, for it was not a local institution like the annual Sabbaths. Its violation was one chief cause of the Babylonish captivity, and their final restoration to their own land was made conditional upon their observing it in their dispersion. The feasts, new moons, and annual Sabbaths were restored when the Hebrews returned from captivity, and with some interruptions were kept up until the final destruction of their city and nation by the Romans. But ere the providence of God thus struck out of existence these Jewish festivals, the whole typical system was abolished, having reached the commencement of its antitype, when our Lord Jesus Christ expired upon the cross. The handwriting of ordinances being thus abolished, no one is to be judged respecting its meats or drinks or holy days or new moons or Sabbaths, which are a shadow of things to come, but the body is of Christ. But the Sabbath of the Lord did not form a part of this handwriting of ordinances, for it was instituted before sin had entered the world, and consequently before there was any shadow of redemption. It was written by the finger of God, not in the midst of types and shadows, but in the bosom of the moral law. And the day following that on which the typical Sabbaths were nailed to the cross, the Sabbath commandment of the moral law is expressly recognized. Moreover, when the Jewish festivals were utterly extinguished with the final destruction of Jerusalem, even then was the Sabbath of the Lord brought to the minds of his people. Thus have we traced the annual Sabbaths until their final cessation, as predicted by Hosea. It remains that we trace the Sabbath of the Lord until we reach the endless ages of the new earth, when we shall find the whole multitude of the redeemed assembling before God for worship on each successive Sabbath. Chapter 8. The Sabbath from David to Nehemiah. When we leave the books of Moses, there is a long-continued break in the history of the Sabbath. No mention of it is found in the book of Joshua, nor in that of Judges, nor in the book of Ruth, nor in that of 1 Samuel, nor in the book of 2 Samuel, nor in that of 1 Kings. It is not until we reach the book of 2 Kings that the Sabbath is even mentioned. In the book of 1 Chronicles, however, which as a narrative is parallel to the two books of Samuel, the Sabbath is mentioned with reference to the events of David's life. Yet this leaves a period of 500 years which the Bible passes in silence respecting the Sabbath. During this period, we have a circumstantial history of the Hebrew people from their entrance into the Promised Land forward to the establishment of David as their king, embracing many particulars in the life of Joshua, of the elders and judges of Israel, of Gideon, of Barak, of Jephthah, of Samson, of Eli, of Naomi and Ruth, of Hannah and Samuel, of Saul, of Jonathan, and of David. Yet in all this minute record we have no direct mention of the Sabbath. It is a favorite argument with anti-Sabbatarians in proof of the total neglect of the Sabbath in the patriarchal age that the book of Genesis, which does give a distinct view of the origin of the Sabbath in paradise at the close of the first week of time, does not, in recording the lives of the patriarchs, say anything relative to its observance. Yet in that one book are crowded the events of 2,370 years. What then should they say of the fact that 6 successive books of the Bible, relating with comparative minuteness the events of 500 years, and involving many circumstances that would call out a mention of the Sabbath, do not mention it at all? Does the silence of one book, which nevertheless does give the institution of the Sabbath at its very commencement, and which brings into its record almost 2,400 years, prove that there were no Sabbath keepers prior to Moses? What then is proved by the fact that 6 successive books of the Bible, confining themselves to the events of 500 years, an average of less than 100 years apiece, the whole period covered by them being about 1/5 that embraced in the book of Genesis, do nevertheless preserve total silence respecting the Sabbath? No one will adduce this silence as evidence of total neglect of the Sabbath during this period, yet why should they not? Is it because that when the narrative after this long silence brings in the Sabbath again, it does this incidentally and not as a new institution? Precisely such is the case with the second mention of the Sabbath in the Mosaic record, that is, with its mention after the silence in Genesis. Is it because the 4th commandment had been given to the Hebrews, whereas no such precept had previously been given to mankind? This answer cannot be admitted, for we have seen that the substance of the 4th commandment was given to the head of the human family, and it is certain that when the Hebrews came out of Egypt, they were under obligation to keep the Sabbath in consequence of existing law. The argument, therefore, is certainly more conclusive that there were no Sabbath keepers from Moses to David than that there were none from Adam to Moses. Yet no one will attempt to maintain the first position, however many there will be to affirm the latter. Several facts are narrated in the history of this period of 5 centuries that have a claim to our notice. The first of these is found in the record of the siege of Jericho. By the command of God, the city was encompassed by the Hebrews each day for 7 days. On the last day of the 7, they encompassed it 7 times, when by divine interposition the walls were thrown down before them and the city taken by assault. One day of this 7 must have been the Sabbath of the Lord. Did not the people of God therefore violate the Sabbath in their acting thus? Let the following facts answer. Number 1, that which they did in this case was by direct command of God. Number 2, that which is forbidden in the 4th commandment is our own work. 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work, but the 7th day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. He who reserved the 7th day unto himself had the right to require its appropriation to his service as he saw fit. Number 3, the act of encompassing the city was strictly as a religious procession. The Ark of the Covenant of the Lord was borne before the people, and before the ark went 7 priests blowing with trumpets of ram's horns. Number 4, nor could the city have been very extensive, else the going round it 7 times on the last day, and there having time left for its complete destruction, would have been impossible. Number 5, nor can it be believed that the Hebrews, by God's command carrying the ark before them, which contains simply the 10 words of the Most High, were violating the 4th of these words, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. It is certain that one of those 7 days on which they encompassed Jericho was the Sabbath, but there is no necessity for supposing this to have been the day on which the city was taken. Nor is this a reasonable conjecture when all the facts in the case are considered. On this incident, Dr. Clark remarks as follows, quote, "It does not appear that there could be any breach in the Sabbath by the people simply going round the city, the ark in company, and the priests sounding the sacred trumpets. This was a mere religious procession performed at the command of God, in which no servile work was done." Close quote. At the word of Joshua, it pleased God to arrest the earth in its revolution, and thus to cause the sun to remain stationary for a season, that the Canaanites might be overthrown before Israel. Did not this great miracle derange the Sabbath? Not at all, for the lengthening of one of the 6 days by God's intervention could not prevent the actual arrival of the seventh day, though it would delay it, nor could it destroy its identity. The case involves a difficulty for those who hold the theory that God sanctified the seventh part of time, and not the seventh day. For in this case, the seventh part of time was not allotted to the Sabbath, but there is no difficulty involved for those who believe that God set apart the seventh day to be kept as it arrives, in memory of His own rest. One of the 6 days was allotted a greater length than ever before or since, yet this did not in the slightest degree conflict with the seventh day, which nevertheless did come. Moreover, all this was while inspired men were upon the stage of action, and it was by the direct providence of God. And what is also to be particularly remembered, it was at a time when no one will deny that the fourth commandment was in full force. The case of David's eating the showbread is worthy of notice, as it probably took place upon the Sabbath, and because it is cited by our Lord in a memorable conversation with the Pharisees. The law of the showbread enjoined the setting forth of 12 loaves in the sanctuary upon the pure table before the Lord every Sabbath. When new bread was thus placed before the Lord each Sabbath, the old was taken away to be eaten by the priests. It appears that the showbread which was given to David had that day been taken from before the Lord to put hot bread in its place, and consequently that day was the Sabbath. Thus, when David asked bread, the priest said, "There is no common bread under mine hand, but there is hallowed bread." And David said, "The bread is in a manner common, especially, as the margin has it, when this day there is other sanctified in the vessel." And so the sacred writer adds, "The priest gave him hallowed bread, for there was no bread there but the showbread, that was taken from before the Lord, to put hot bread in the day when it was taken away." The circumstances of this case all favor the view that this was upon the Sabbath. Number 1, there was no common bread with the priest. This is not strange when it is remembered that the showbread was to be taken from before the Lord each Sabbath and eaten by the priests. Number 2, that the priest did not offer to prepare other bread is not singular if it be understood that this was the Sabbath. Number 3, the surprise of the priest in meeting David may have been in part owing to the fact that it was the Sabbath. Number 4, this also may account for the detention of Doeg that day before the Lord. Number 5, when our Lord was called upon to pronounce upon the conduct of His disciples who had plucked and eaten the ears of corn upon the Sabbath to satisfy their hunger, He cited this case of David, and that of the priests offering sacrifices in the temple upon the Sabbath as justifying the disciples. There is a wonderful propriety and fitness in this citation, if it be understood that this act of David's took place upon the Sabbath. It will be found to present the matter in a very different light from that in which anti-Sabbatarians present it. A distinction may be here pointed out, which should never be lost sight of. The presentation of the showbread and the offering of burnt sacrifices upon the Sabbath as ordained in the ceremonial law formed no part of the original Sabbatic institution. For the Sabbath was made before the fall of man, while burnt offerings and ceremonial rites in the sanctuary were introduced in consequence of the fall. While these rites were in force, they necessarily, to some extent, connected the Sabbath with the festivals of the Jews in which the like offerings were made. This is seen only in those scriptures which record the provision made for these offerings. When the ceremonial law was nailed to the cross, all the Jewish festivals ceased to exist, for they were ordained by it. But the abrogation of that law could only take away those rights which it had appended to the Sabbath, leaving the original institution precisely as it came at first from its author. The earliest reference to the Sabbath after the days of Moses is found in what David and Samuel ordained respecting the offices of the priests and Levites at the house of God. It is as follows: "And other of their brethren, of the sons of the Kohathites, were over the showbread, to prepare it every Sabbath." It will be observed that this is only an incidental mention of the Sabbath. Such an allusion, occurring after so long a silence, is decisive proof that the Sabbath had not been forgotten or lost during the 5 centuries in which it had not been mentioned by the sacred historians. After this, no direct mention of the Sabbath is found from the days of David to those of Elisha the prophet, a period of about 150 years. Perhaps the 92nd Psalm is an exception to this statement, as its title, both in Hebrew and English, declares that it was written for the Sabbath day. And it is not improbable that it was composed by David, the sweet singer of Israel. The son of the Shunammite woman being dead, she sought the prophet Elisha. Her husband, not knowing that the child was dead, said to her, "Wherefore wilt thou go to him today? It is neither new moon nor Sabbath." And she said, "It shall be well." It is probable that the Sabbath of the Lord is here intended, as it is thrice used in a like connection. If this be correct, it shows that the Hebrews were accustomed to visit the prophets of God upon that day for divine instruction, a very good commentary upon the words used relative to gathering the manna. "Let no man go out of his place on the 7th day." Incidental allusion is made to the Sabbath at the accession of Jehoash to the throne of Judah about B.C. 778. In the reign of Uzziah, the grandson of Jehoash, the prophet Amos, B.C. 787, uses the following language: "Hear this, O ye that swallow up the needy, even to make the poor of the land to fail, saying, When will the new moon be gone, that we may sell corn? And the Sabbath, that we may set forth wheat, making the ephah small and the shekel great, and falsifying the balances by deceit? That we may buy the poor for silver, and the needy for a pair of shoes, yea, and sell the refuse of the wheat." These words were spoken more directly concerning the 10 tribes, and indicate the sad state of apostasy, which soon after resulted in their overthrow as a people. About 50 years after this, at the close of the reign of Ahaz, another allusion to the Sabbath is found. In the days of Hezekiah, about B.C. 712, the prophet Isaiah uses the following language in enforcing the Sabbath: "Thus saith the Lord, Keep ye judgment and do justice, for my salvation is near to come, and my righteousness to be revealed. Blessed is the man that doeth this, and the Son of Man that layeth hold on it, that keepeth the Sabbath from polluting it, and keepeth his hand from doing any evil. Neither let the son of the stranger, that hath joined himself to the Lord, speak, saying, The Lord hath utterly separated me from his people. Neither let the eunuch say, Behold, I am a dry tree. For thus saith the Lord unto the eunuchs that keep my Sabbaths, and choose the things that please me, and take hold of my covenant, even unto them will I give in mine house and within my walls a place and a name better than of sons and of daughters. I will give them an everlasting name that shall not be cut off. Also the sons of the stranger, that join themselves to the Lord to serve him, and to love the name of the Lord, to be his servants, every one that keepeth the Sabbath from polluting it, and taketh hold of my covenant. Even them will I bring to my holy mountain, and make them joyful in my house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and their sacrifices shall be accepted upon mine altar, for mine house shall be called a house of prayer for all people. The Lord God which gathereth the outcasts of Israel saith, Yet will I gather others to him, beside those that are gathered unto him. This prophecy presents several features of peculiar interest. Number 1, it pertains to a time when the salvation of God is near at hand. Number 2, it most distinctly shows that the Sabbath is not a Jewish institution, for it pronounces a blessing upon that man without respect of nationality, who shall keep the Sabbath, and it then particularizes the son of the stranger, that is, the Gentile, and makes a peculiar promise to him if he will keep the Sabbath. Number 3, and this prophecy relates to Israel when they are outcasts, that is, when they are in their dispersion, promising to gather them and others, that is, the Gentiles, with them. Of course, the condition of being gathered to God's holy mountain must be complied with, namely, to love the name of the Lord, to be his servants, and to keep the Sabbath from polluting it. Number 4, and hence it follows that the Sabbath is not a local institution, susceptible of being observed in the Promised Land alone, like the annual Sabbaths, but one made for mankind and capable of being observed by the outcasts of Israel when scattered in every land under heaven. Isaiah again presents the Sabbath, and this he does in language most emphatically distinguishing it from all ceremonial institutions. Thus he says, If thou turn away thy foot from the Sabbath, from doing thy pleasure on my holy day, and call the Sabbath a delight, the holy of the Lord, honorable, and shalt honor him, not doing thine own ways, nor finding thine own pleasure, nor speaking thine own words, then shalt thou delight thyself in the Lord, and I will cause thee to ride upon the high places of the earth, and feed thee with the heritage of Jacob thy father, for the mouth of the Lord hath spoken it. This language is an evangelical commentary upon the fourth commandment. It appends to it an exceeding great and precious promise that takes hold upon the land promised to Jacob, even the new earth. In the year B.C. 601, 13 years before the destruction of Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar, God made to the Jewish people through Jeremiah the gracious offer that if they would keep his Sabbath, their city should stand forever. At the same time he testified unto them that if they would not do this, their city should be utterly destroyed. Thus said the prophet, Hear ye the word of the Lord, you kings of Judah, and all Judah, and all the inhabitants of Jerusalem, that enter in by these gates. Thus saith the Lord, Take heed to yourselves, and bear no burden on the Sabbath day, nor bring it in by the gates of Jerusalem. Neither carry forth a burden out of your houses on the Sabbath day, neither do ye any work, but hallow ye the Sabbath day, as I commanded your fathers. But they obeyed not, neither inclined their ears, but made their necks stiff, that they might not hear nor receive instruction. And it shall come to pass, if ye diligently hearken unto me, saith the Lord, to bring in no burden through the gates of this city on the Sabbath day, but hallow the Sabbath day, to do no work therein, then shall there enter into the gates of this city kings and princes sitting upon the throne of David, riding in chariots and on horses, they and their princes, the men of Judah, and the inhabitants of Jerusalem. And this city shall remain forever. And they shall come from the cities of Judah, and from the places about Jerusalem, and from the land of Benjamin, and from the plain, and from the mountains, and from the south, bringing burnt offerings and sacrifices, and meat offerings and incense, and bringing sacrifices of praise unto the house of the Lord. But if you will not hearken unto me to hallow the Sabbath day, and not to bear a burden, even entering in at the gates of Jerusalem on the Sabbath day, Then will I kindle a fire in the gates thereof, and it shall devour the palaces of Jerusalem, and it shall not be quenched. This gracious offer of the Most High to his rebellious people was not regarded by them, for 8 years after this Ezekiel testifies thus: In thee have they set light by father and mother. In the midst of thee have they dealt by oppression with the stranger. In thee have they vexed the fatherless and the widow. Thou hast despised mine holy things, and hast profaned my Sabbaths. Her priests have violated my law, and have profaned mine holy things. They have put no difference between the holy and profane, neither have they showed difference between the unclean and the clean, and have hid their eyes from my Sabbaths, and I am profaned among them. Moreover, this they have done unto me: they have defiled my sanctuary in the same day, and have profaned my Sabbaths. For when they had slain their children to their idols, then they came the same day into my sanctuary to profane it. And lo, thus have they done in the midst of mine house. Idolatry and Sabbath breaking, which were besetting sins with the Hebrews in the wilderness, and which there laid the foundation for their dispersion from their own land, had ever cleaved unto them. And now when their destruction was impending from the overwhelming power of the king of Babylon, they were so deeply attached to these and kindred sins that they would not regard the voice of warning. Before entering the sanctuary of God upon his Sabbath, they first slew their own children in sacrifice to their idols. This iniquity came to its height, and wrath came upon them to the uttermost. They mocked the messengers of God and despised his words and misused his prophets until the wrath of the Lord arose against his people, till there was no remedy. Therefore he brought upon them the king of the Chaldees, who slew their young men with the sword in the house of their sanctuary, and had no compassion upon young man or maiden, old man or him that stooped for age. He gave them all into his hand. And all the vessels of the house of God, great and small, and the treasures of the house of the Lord, and the treasures of the king and of his princes, all these he brought to Babylon. And they burnt the house of God, and brake down the wall of Jerusalem, and burnt all the palaces thereof with fire, and destroyed all the goodly vessels thereof. And them that had escaped from the sword carried he away to Babylon, where they were servants to him and his sons until the reign of the king of Persia. While the Hebrews were in captivity at Babylon, God made to them an offer of restoring them to their own land and giving them again a city and a temple under circumstances of wonderful glory. The condition of that offer being disregarded, the offered glory was never inherited by them. In this offer were several allusions to the Sabbath of the Lord, and also to the festivals of the Hebrews. One of these allusions is worthy of particular notice for the distinctness with which it discriminates between the Sabbath and the other days of the week. Thus saith the Lord God, The gate of the inner court that looketh toward the east shall be shut the 6 working days, but on the Sabbath it shall be opened, and in the day of the new moon it shall be opened. 6 days of the week are by divine inspiration called the 6 working days. The 7th is called the Sabbath of the Lord. Who shall dare confound this marked distinction? After the Jews had returned from their captivity in Babylon, and had restored their temple and city, in a solemn assembly of the whole people they recount in an address to the Most High all the great events of God's providence in their past history. Thus they testify respecting the Sabbath. Thou camest down also upon Mount Sinai, and spakest with them from heaven, and gavest them right judgments, and true laws, good statutes and commandments, and madest known unto them thy holy Sabbath, and commandest them precepts, statutes, and laws by the hand of Moses thy servant. Thus were all the people reminded of the great events of Mount Sinai, the giving of the 10 words of the law of God, and the making known of his holy Sabbath. So deeply impressed was the whole congregation with the effect of their former disobedience that they entered into a solemn covenant to obey God. They pledged themselves to each other thus: "And if the people of the land bring ware or any victuals on the Sabbath day to sell, that we would not buy it of them on the Sabbath or on the holy day, and that we would leave the 7th year and the exaction of every debt." In the absence of Nehemiah at the Persian court, this covenant was in part at least forgotten. 11 years having elapsed, Nehemiah thus testifies concerning things at his return about B.C. 434. "In those days saw I in Judah some treading wine presses on the Sabbath, and bringing in sheaves, and lading asses, as also wine, grapes, and figs, and all manner of burdens, which they brought into Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. And I testified against them in the day wherein they sold victuals. There dwelt men of Tyre also therein, which brought fish and all manner of ware, and sold on the Sabbath unto the children of Judah and in Jerusalem. Then I contended with the nobles of Judah, and said unto them, What evil thing is this that you do, and profane the Sabbath day? Did not your fathers thus, and did not our God bring all this evil upon us, and upon this city? Yet you bring more wrath upon Israel by profaning the Sabbath. And it came to pass that when the gates of Jerusalem began to be dark before the Sabbath, I commanded that the gates should be shut, and charged that they should not be opened till after the Sabbath. And some of my servants set I at the gates, that there should no burden be brought in on the Sabbath day. So the merchants and sellers of all kind of ware lodged without Jerusalem once or twice. Then I testified against them, and said unto them, Why lodge ye about the wall? If you do so again, I will lay hands upon you. From that time forth came they no more on the Sabbath. And I commanded the Levites that they should cleanse themselves, and that they should come and keep the gates, to sanctify the Sabbath day. Remember me, O my God, concerning this also, and spare me according to the greatness of thy mercy. This scripture is an explicit testimony that the destruction of Jerusalem and the captivity of the Jews at Babylon were in consequence of their profanation of the Sabbath. It is a striking confirmation of the language of Jeremiah already noticed, in which he testified to the Jews that if they would hallow the Sabbath, their city should stand forever, but that it should be utterly destroyed if they persisted in its profanation. Nehemiah bears testimony to the accomplishment of Jeremiah's prediction concerning the violation of the Sabbath. And with his solemn appeal in its behalf ends the history of the Sabbath in the Old Testament. Chapter 9. The Sabbath from Nehemiah to Christ. The period of almost 5 centuries intervenes between the time of Nehemiah and the commencement of the ministry of the Redeemer. During this time, an extraordinary change came over the Jewish people. Previously, they had been, to an alarming extent, idolaters and outbreaking violators of the Sabbath. But after their return from Babylon, they were never guilty of idolatry to any extent, the chastisement of that captivity effecting a cure of this evil. In like manner did they change their conduct relative to the Sabbath, and during this period they loaded the Sabbatic institution with the most burdensome and rigorous ordinances. A brief survey of this period must suffice. Under the reign of Antiochus Epiphanes, the king of Syria, B.C. 170, the Jews were greatly oppressed. King Antiochus wrote to his whole kingdom that all should be one people, and every one should leave his laws. So all the heathen agreed according to the commandment of the king. Yea, many also of the Israelites consented to his religion, and sacrificed unto idols, and profaned the Sabbath. The greater part of the Hebrews remained faithful to God, and as a consequence were obliged to flee for their lives. Thus the historian continues. Then many that sought after justice and judgment went down into the wilderness to dwell there, both they and their children and their wives and their cattle, because afflictions increased sore upon them. Now when it was told the king's servants and the host that was at Jerusalem in the city of David, that certain men who had broken the king's commandment were gone down into the secret places in the wilderness, they pursued after them a great number, and having overtaken them, they camped against them, and made war against them on the Sabbath day. And they said unto them, Let that which you have done hitherto suffice. Come forth and do according to the commandment of the king, and you shall live. But they said, We will not come forth, neither will we do the king's commandment, to profane the Sabbath day. So then they gave them the battle with all speed. Howbeit they answered them not, neither cast they a stone at them, nor stopped the places where they lay hid, but said, Let us die all in our innocency. Heaven and earth shall testify for us, that ye put us to death wrongfully. So they rose up against them in battle on the Sabbath, and they slew them, with their wives and children, and their cattle, to the number of 1,000 people. In Jerusalem itself a like massacre took place. King Antiochus sent Apollonius with an army of 22,000, who coming to Jerusalem and pretending peace, did forbear till the holy day of the Sabbath, when taking the Jews keeping holy day, he commanded his men to arm themselves. And so he slew all them that were gone to the celebrating of the Sabbath, and running through the city with weapons, slew great multitudes. In view of these dreadful acts of slaughter, Mattathias, an honorable and great man, the father of Judas Maccabeus, with his friends decreed thus, Whosoever shall come to make battle with us on the Sabbath day, we will fight against him. Neither will we die all, as our brethren that were murdered in the secret places. Yet were some martyred after this for observing the Sabbath. And thus we read, And others that had run together into caves near by, to keep the Sabbath day secretly, being discovered to Philip, were all burnt together, because they made a conscience to help themselves for the honor of the most sacred day. After this, Judas Maccabeus did great exploits in defense of the Hebrews, and in resisting the dreadful oppression of the Syrian government. Of one of these battles we read, When he had given them this watchword, the help of God, himself leading the first band, he joined battle with Nicanor, and by the help of the Almighty they slew above 9,000 of their enemies, and wounded and maimed the most part of Nicanor's host, and so put all to flight, and took their money that came to buy them, and pursued them far. But lacking time they returned, for it was the day before the Sabbath, and therefore they would no longer pursue them. So when they had gathered their armor together and spoiled their enemies, they occupied themselves about the Sabbath, yielding exceeding praise and thanks to the Lord, who had preserved them unto that day, which was the beginning of mercy distilled upon them. And after the Sabbath, when they had given part of the spoils to the maimed, and the widows and orphans, the residue they divided among themselves and their servants. After this, the Hebrews, being attacked upon the Sabbath by their enemies, defeated them with much slaughter. About B.C. 63, Jerusalem was besieged and taken by Pompey, the general of the Romans. To do this, it was necessary to fill an immense ditch, and to raise against the city a bank on which to place the engines of assault. Thus Josephus relates the event. And had it not been our practice from the days of our forefathers to rest on the seventh day, this bank could never have been perfected by reason of the opposition the Jews would have made. For though our law gives us leave then to defend ourselves against those that begin to fight with us and assault us, yet does it not permit us to meddle with our enemies while they do anything else? Which thing when the Romans understood, on those days which we call Sabbaths, they threw nothing at the Jews, nor came to any pitched battle with them, but raised up their earthen banks, and brought their engines into such forwardness that they might do execution the next days. From this it is seen that Pompey carefully refrained from any attack upon the Jews on each Sabbath during the siege, but spent that day in filling the ditch and raising the bank, that he might attack them on the day following each Sabbath, that is, upon Sunday. Josephus further relates that the priests were not at all hindered from their sacred ministrations by the stones thrown among them from the engines of Pompey, even if any melancholy accident happened, and that when the city was taken and the enemy fell upon them and cut the throats of those that were in the temples, yet did not the priests run away or desist from the offering of the accustomed sacrifices. These quotations from Jewish history are sufficient to indicate the extraordinary change that came over that people concerning the Sabbath after the Babylonish captivity. A brief view of the teaching of the Jewish doctors respecting the Sabbath at the time when our Lord began his ministry will conclude this chapter. They enumerated about 40 primary works, which they said were forbidden to be done on the Sabbath. Under each of these were numerous secondary works, which they said were also forbidden. Among the primary works which were forbidden were plowing, sowing, reaping, winnowing, cleaning, grinding, etc. Under the head of grinding was included the breaking or dividing of things which were before united. Another of their traditions was that as threshing on the Sabbath was forbidden, the bruising of things, which was a species of threshing, was also forbidden. Of course, it was a violation of the Sabbath to walk on green grass, for that would bruise or thresh it. So, as a man might not hunt on the Sabbath, he might not catch a flea, for that was a species of hunting. As a man might not carry a burden on the Sabbath, he might not carry water to a thirsty animal, for that was a species of burden. But he might pour water into a trough and lead the animal to it. Yet should a sheep fall into a pit, they would readily lift him out and bear him to a place of safety. They said a man might minister to the sick for purpose of relieving their distress, but not for the purpose of healing their diseases. He might put a covering on a diseased eye, or anoint it with eye salve for the purpose of easing the pain, but not to cure the eye. Such was the remarkable change in the conduct of the Jewish people towards the Sabbath, and such was the teaching of their doctors respecting it. The most merciful institution of God for mankind had become a source of distress. That which God ordained as a delight and a source of refreshment had become a yoke of bondage. The Sabbath, made for man in paradise, was now a most oppressive and burdensome institution. It was time that God should interfere. Next upon the scene of action appears the Lord of the Sabbath.